Hey everybody, this is Chris with Overclockersclub. Today I've got from Cooler Master the MWE 750 Gold. This is a fully modular power supply. That means where all your cables usually come out, there are none attached. You can connect whatever you want. So let's get this plastic off, open the box, and see what's inside. The unit is out of the box, and I've often heard that you can tell the quality of a unit by how heavy it is, and I've picked up units before that you just wonder if there was anything inside the case at all, but this one's got some weight to it. I don't know how much truth there is to that, but that's what I've always heard. Anyway, on the side here, since this is fully modular, we have no cables connected to it at all. It's completely by itself. But the nice thing is on this side here, this face has a listing showing you exactly what gets plugged into where. So if there's any confusion, you know what to do. Now as far as cords and cables, of course there's the power supply, main 120 volt power cable. Then you've got your main 24 pin. This is what goes to your motherboard on this side. This end here is going to plug in here and here. I'm not going to push them in just right yet, but that's where those would go. And this would supply the power to the motherboard. This guy here is what's going to supply power to the CPU. So on your motherboard, there's going to be either a couple of 4s or an 8-pin connector there, and that's what this is. This supplies power to the CPU. We have one good old-fashioned Molex connector. We've got 3 ports there, or 3 plugs, I guess you could say, for Molex connectors, if you have anything that uses Molex. Then we have 1 and 2 dedicated PCIe cables. So these are what would go to your video card, for example. And we have each end has a 6 plus a 2, so you've got 8, 8. And this one here, you've got 6 plus 2, 6 plus 2 again. So we have 2 of those cables. Then we have another Molex, except this Molex, in addition to the 3 Molex ends, we have one of these little guys here. And this is what, back in the day, this is what would connect to your floppy drive. If even anybody has one of those anymore, that's what would connect to it. And over here we've got 2 SATAs. This is all nothing but SATA. So we've got 4 on this one. So you can hook up 4 hard drives or 4 devices that use a SATA plug. And we've got 4 more on this. So you've got a total of 8 SATA plugs. Now, what I'll do next here is I'll go ahead and get the case open so we can sort of see what's going on inside. And we'll fire it up, connect it to a motherboard, put a little load on it, and use the thermal camera just to kind of see where the heat is. But we do have a nice 120 millimeter cooling fan there to move the air through the case of the power supply. I'll go ahead and get these screws out of here. Now this isn't something you would normally do at home, but just so I can show you what's going on inside, I'll take the cover off. And a lot of reasons for not doing that at home. There's some high voltage going on in here, and you will void your warranty if you take the screw out, if I can find it here. Now this is a 90% efficient unit, which is good. It's the 80 plus gold rating, which means 90%. And it is 750 watts. Now that's power. And if you take 750 and divide it by 12 volts on your main rail, that gives you about 62.5 amps. Because volts times amps gives you power, or watts. I can get this off here. There we go. Now be careful because the fan is attached. So we'll just move this over to the side and you can see what's going on. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about all the components, but when we put the thermal camera to it, you'll see where the heat is concentrated. And on the inside here is the 120 millimeter fan. It does have a special bearing for silence, so you get nice quiet operation. And there's a little shield here to help direct the air specifically where it needs to go. Here's a little better close-up as I scan over the top. And again, once you take the top off, you will void your warranty, which is 5 years, and you really don't want to do that. I got my test motherboard over here to the side, so I'll go ahead and connect it to the power supply and put a little load on it, and we'll watch what the temperatures do. But nice thing here in the instruction manual, if you have any questions as to what the pins do on all the plugs, they're really mapped out right here in the instruction manual, so that's nice. All right, let's get this thing rolling. Everything is assembled and powered up. Of course, I've got everything outside of a case so that we can really see what's going on. But there's the information on the side as far as the power output, and like I said, 12 volts divided by, or I'm sorry, 12 times 62.5 gives you 750 watts. So volts times amps gives you power. Now, as far as being quiet, I can get right down on this at idle. There's no load on the system, and it is absolutely quiet. And the fan's spinning at a fair rate there. In fact, the cooling fans over there on the Noctua D14 are far louder than anything that this power supply is putting out. So now we'll get some thermal imaging when it's idling. So there we are looking at the intake of the power supply. We are at idle, so there's no load on the system, and there's the exhaust vent on the back, so you can see the temperature coming out of there at idle. And I'll pop the cover off in a little bit, and we'll look at the temps of the internal components. And then of course the motherboard, again, we're at idle, no load. It's exhaust temp there, and then there's the chipset too. It's a little warmer, of course. So we'll put a load on it and see what the temps do. Now the system's under a load. I got it overclocked. Temperature a little warmer on the exhaust side, but I can tell you it was quiet. The fan was absolutely quiet at idle, and as I get up to it, the fans on the cooler here are far louder than the cooling fan there. So we've got the system under a load, we've got the video card under a load also, and then we've got the CPU over here under a load. So this is sort of like the worst case that you would expect to see. I guess you could have a few more hard drives and fans hooked up, but this kind of gives you an idea. Now we'll get the cover popped off and look at it at idle and under load. And here we are with the top removed under a load. Again, the graphics card and the CPU are loaded up. And we can see the temps there. It looks like everything really from a temperature standpoint is concentrated right at the center. We're around 50 C, just a tad over. And the rest of the components look to be fairly cool. Well, much to my surprise, I don't really see a whole lot of difference in the temperatures here. We're at idle. There's no load on the CPU or the graphics card. And my temperatures there in the center again are at the highest. We're right around 50, so I would have expected to see a little bit of a difference, but I don't, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Looks like the power supply is not really affected with regard to additional heat when it's under a load. I guess that's where the higher efficiency really comes into play. You're not dumping a lot of excess heat into the room, which is really important if you live in a warm climate or in the summertime. Well, on the surface I was actually surprised that I didn't see more of a temperature differential than I did between idle and load. But when you think about it, with a 90% efficient power supply, you really aren't generating that much heat. You're not dumping that much out into the atmosphere. And that makes sense. When I'm looking for a power supply, there are two, maybe three things if you factor price in there, but there are two main things I'm looking for. The first one is efficiency. I want a power supply that is as efficient as I can afford, or as efficient as it can be. And coming in at 90%, which I really proved with the thermals, you're not going to get much more efficient than that. And the reason I like that is I don't want to dump any more heat into my case or into my room than I have to. If you live in a cold climate, or it's wintertime, maybe that's not so much of a factor, but if you live in a warm climate, or especially in the summertime, you really don't want to dump any more heat than you have to. And Cooler Master has that covered here with this one. Second thing is sound. Now, I'm not too worried about power supplies making noise. They're usually tucked away in the bottom of the case or under a shroud, but they can be noisy at times. This one here is whisper quiet at idle, even under a load when the fan's spooled up. Absolutely whisper quiet, can't hear a thing. Part of that, we have the special bearing there for the fan. The fan is definitely capable of moving enough air through it. Price, we're looking at $89, $99, right around $100, call it $100. You can find it on sale or special deals sometimes, but I would say this one is worth every penny. Fully modular, you don't have any extra cables that you don't need. 750 watts on this one. This is going to be good for most of your builds. If you go to the Cooler Master website, there's a little calculator you can put in your system specs, and it will sort of give you a range of the expected wattage that you might need for a power supply. But people years ago, it was popular to do SLI where you had multiple video cards. You really needed a power supply that could handle the load. Not so much. The trend is more back to single graphics cards, generally speaking. So that means your power supplies don't need to put out as much. Anyway, I think Cooler Master really hits the ball out of the park here with this one. Great power supply. This is Chris with Overclockersclub. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.